It's Friday. Thank you all for sticking with us and for joining us this morning for the final plenary of the 2023 Water and Health Conference. We're so glad that you chose to stay for Friday because we've got a great interview coming up this morning. Just a couple more announcements before we get started. We are joined by over 2,000 folks from around the world, over 100 countries represented in our online crowd. And so if you wouldn't mind giving them a final wave and a farewell wave to the camera. And we really appreciated their involvement in our conference this week. And they are still being translated into French and Spanish. And so thank you to our translators from Island Innovation who are helping translate today's plenary session. We will not have the virtual networking session online today, but we did enjoy a final wrap-up with Jan-Willem Rosenboom, and thank you so much, Jan-Willem, for hosting that show all week. I do want to remind everybody that all of the recorded sessions, all the live stream sessions will be put onto the YouTube channel, the Water Institute Conference YouTube channel, for you to enjoy and go back to after the conference. And we'll be sending out that link next week, and so stay tuned for that. We also have the nice catalog of photos that were taken at the Zoom photo booth. They will also be available online for you to download, as well as, where's Tom Fuldner? He's in the back. Tom is going to share with us a link to all the photos that he has taken over the course of the week, and you will have access to those as well. So make sure that you look out for an email from us, and we'll send you all the links to access all of those materials. So thanks to all of you who make that possible. Every year we announce the Jeroen Ensink Memorial Prize, and so this year the prize was awarded to Rowan Ellis and Anu Karapal. And I do want to encourage you to check out that abstract online, and we'll post that on our website as well. We didn't have any notice from Nadia this year, but we will certainly post the abstract and the award on our website, so check them out. And remember, we don't just tweet or X. During the conference, we do this all year, and so make sure to stay connected with us online and through social media. And it is my pleasure now to welcome Aaron Salzberg, and he will introduce our guest of honor today. And then stick with us because we have several announcements and thank yous to go through at the end of the session today. So thank you.
Run into each other. Coming up. Okay, welcome again to Friday, and good morning. Hopefully we've saved the best for last. That's what we're trying to do. Sarosh, let me catch you up a little bit because it's been a long week here. On Monday, we sit down, we talked a little bit about the future of WASH, what the impacts of climate change, water security will be on our capacity to provide WASH services and sustain WASH services, the importance of science and evidence to inform decision-making, of data and integration, and the importance of data and having data and integrating that into our decision-making processes, and the importance of institutions and structures that we need to help us prioritize our issues, ensure we're on the right track, and the importance of prioritizing social justice and making sure that remains front and center in our programming and our programming efforts. On Tuesday, we shifted a little bit and we dug a little bit deeper into the challenges of working in fragile and humanitarian settings. How do we strengthen systems when there are no systems? How do we work with governments when there are no governments? And while we talked about systems, and Danielle, I think, is here somewhere, when we talked a little bit and explored this space, it started to get a little bit more nuanced. It's not just about systems the way we think of integrating different sectors together, but it's really about establishing those networks and relationships that allow communities to respond and adapt, and that you can do that ahead of conflict in fragile settings that allow them to prepare and respond more rapidly when they are subject to those types of conditions. On Wednesday, and this is something we'll talk a little bit about, we talked about the water commitments made at the 2023 conference. We actually looked at an analysis that was produced by UNC on the commitments that were made, and what we found, in fact, was that Most of the commitments were not really commitments at all, and very few focused on sanitation, hygiene, or even articulated a priority on the needs of the poor. And so it left us with some real questions about whether or not the work that we're doing at the global level is actually moving us in the direction that we need to go in. Yesterday, instead of looking outward and looking at the UN systems, we started to look inward a little bit. And if you guys did not catch yesterday's, definitely look at it online and check out the YouTube recording of it. We looked inward, and we looked at ourselves as a community to examine our own role in perpetuating colonialism and enabling inequalities. And that if we're going to break through on some of these issues, that we need to work to identify, disrupt, and disable the systems that continue to operate that oppress these populations. And that was a really strong message. It's been quite a week, but I wanted to give you a little bit of context before I brought you up here. Sarosh, can you come on up? I'd like to introduce Sarosh Kumar Jha. He's the Global Director of the World Bank's Global Water Practice. And for those of you who don't know, but I assume almost everyone here does, the World Bank is the largest multilateral financier of water security and sanitation in developing countries. They have a portfolio of about 500 projects. I'm going to look over, see if I get any of this wrong. About 500 projects amounting to close to $90 billion. And so in short, where the World Bank goes, the world follows. And that's important, right? So today, my hope is to sit down with Sarosh, and let's see if Mike follows me. Good. And explore a little bit about what keeps you up at night. And let's see if we can get there. But first, I'm a big fan of trying to understand everyone's own lived experience, because I think that informs your approach to how you're going to manage this practice at the World Bank. So maybe you can tell me just a few words about what brought you to the bank, what was your career trajectory, what are the things that were fundamental to kind of shaping and informing your view of the development work that you do today?
Adam, first of all, thank you very much to you and to the UNC Water Institute for inviting me to be here today. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm really very humbled to be here to talk to you in a plenary setting, because I had a very humble beginning. I was born in a poor family where my mother had to wake up very, very early to bring water for everybody in the family because we had no access to drinking water. So, and of course, it was a struggle where we could afford only one meal per person in the family. So we had to decide who's going to eat in the morning, who's going to eat in the evening. So that's the life we had in our childhood. So for me, poverty, hunger, deprivation is not something I have to study in a book. It's something which I have lived. So that's the beginning. But I always had this that what is happening to me shouldn't happen to other people in the world. So that basically gave me the motivation to study hard, to work hard. And I worked fearlessly in every job I have worked so far. I have succeeded in many fronts, but I've also failed, because when you want to take too many risks, you realize that you're taking some miscalculated risks, which doesn't go in your way. But anyway, I've worked for many years. I succeeded in the most competitive exam in the world in India, to be in the Indian Civil Service, IAS, those of you who know that part of the world. I worked in Odisha. I worked with tribal communities very, very closely, what it means to have access to water for tribal families who primarily rely on forest produce. And then something happened in 1999. Those of you who follow crisis, India was hit by a major super cyclone in 1999, and it killed more than 30,000 people, eastern part of India, the state of Odisha. And those days I was on forced administrative leave. You have to wait for my book where you will understand why I was forced to be on leave. But the good news was that I had nothing to do. I was on forced leave. So I decided to go and be in the eye of the storm and make myself available to people who were impacted by this super cyclone. And I worked for 20 days to help people who were impacted by the super cyclone. Again, it's a very long story. I helped set up new initiatives for looking after disaster orphans. And then UNICEF and UNESCO and others came on board. But that gave me a realization that when you really work in crisis, you save lives. That is the most important contribution you can make to humanity as a professional. So I thought I'll continue working on doing more on crisis preparedness, prevention. And so that's what I was doing for many years. And a few years later, I was brought back into the government. And then I was part of a small team to set up India's entire disaster management system. And India has one of the best disaster management framework now. And it is at that point in time, World Bank was looking for somebody who can help set up disaster management practice in the bank. So that is how I came to the World Bank. And I helped set up GFDRR, those of you who know disaster business. I conceptualized it, I got the funds for it, which is now an institution by itself, which I started in 2006. What I did in the bank is I spent 5 years on setting up the disaster management practice globally, and also made a big contribution in organizing the international disaster management system. And bank playing a catalytic role, which is relevant also for the water discussion, by the way, because water sector is very disorganized, is very fragmented, and it needs attention. I'll come to that point a little later. But then I worked in Central Asia for many years as a director, covering all the countries in Central Asia. And then I worked for 2 years as a senior director for fragile states around the world, Afghanistan, Mali, Somalia, etc. And then I was sent back as a regional director of the Middle East, which unfortunately is going through a very difficult time now. And I have many friends and families who are impacted by what's happening in that region. But I lived in that region for 5 years. And then I was asked to lead the World Bank water practice, which I'm very, very honored to take that role, because it helps me to connect me to my early days with my mother, what I used to see. And by the way, my mother lives with me in the US now. And no matter when I come home, if I'm in the US, she'll wait for me till I come back from the office. She wants to see me before she goes to bed. Mother is very special in life, and for all of us, in all religions in the world. So I think I owe it to her. And I tell this, I was in Ghana recently, and I told the Minister of Finance. I was in Ethiopia, and I see our friend, State Minister here. So water is very personal to me, and water is very personal to all of you. So we have to take this agenda much more seriously. So I had a very humble beginning, but I'm very excited to be what I'm doing. I have a great team in the World Bank. But as I always tell my colleagues, the World Bank should not be the people who are sitting inside the World Bank. The World Bank should be the catalytic agent for mobilizing every institution, civil society, private sector, to work on this issue. That's the power of the World Bank as an organization.
No, thank you. And I understand that. I have had an Indian mother-in-law, and I couldn't leave the house without a dabba with me, because you couldn't leave without food that was coming out. Let's start easy. Before asking what the Global Water Practice is, what is a practice within the bank? What's the function of these practice units within the bank?
So practice is there are 14 practices in the World Bank. And these are essentially technical families of professionals, experts, who work on a particular sector. And they're organized in 14 practices. So Water Global Practice is one of those 14. And it comprises of, for example, in our case, people who work on WASH, people who work on irrigation, water resource management, dam safety, and everything that is related to integrated water resource management, groundwater, floods and droughts, and so on and so forth. But what is important in the structure of a practice is that it allows us to focus on knowledge into implementation and then learning from implementation back into our knowledge and research work. So it's in a way, there's a feedback loop working all the time where the operational work is also an opportunity for us to draw lessons and experience and feed into our knowledge work and share it more widely internally and externally. So that knowledge implementation loop is what is the essence of a practice.
So the goal of the practice isn't to make loans. The goal of the practice is to help support loan making by other elements within the bank with technical expertise and knowledge and state-of-the-art learnings from your own experiences.
Correct. But then while doing so, the world is, no problem in the world needs a single sector solution. You always need to work across sectors, and therefore all these vertical practices, when they work on a problem, there will be a task team, we call it inside the World Bank. The task team is comprised of people drawn from all relevant practices. So when you have a team working on, let's say, a WASH project in a country, you'll have, of course, the WASH people, but you'll also have people who specialize, let's say, in gender equality. You'll have somebody who specializes in environmental risks. We have people who specialize in health, nutrition, and population. You may have people who work on indigenous people, semi-indigenous people, tribal people. Their needs are totally different. So that is how these teams are set up. And there's a mechanism to ensure that these teams are formed by drawing on everybody who's needed to really provide a comprehensive solution. So we are close to about 16,000 technical people in the World Bank full-time. And most of them from, I would say, so the best universities in the world. They are both young professionals, mid-career, senior people as well. But these are really hardcore technical people. And I really encourage all of you to really consider working for the World Bank in the water sector, those of you who are still in universities, different places. We are looking for actually people in the field. So we advertise positions from time to time. You should definitely consider. But water is a great sector to work, so you should definitely consider that.
It's up to you guys. No, that's great. I think, my personal view, I think you did an exceptional job when we transitioned to a new World Bank president in positioning water within the bank. I think water is getting more attention than I've seen it get in a decade and decades at the bank. How did you pitch water to the new World Bank president? How did you position the global practice and say that this is something we have to do?
So I think the issue of water security is gaining a lot of political visibility around the world. There are many cities running out of water. There are many countries which can literally count number of years when they will have no water left in the country. And since I was in the Middle East for 5 years, I felt many leaders really very, very concerned about it. And I can see that this is a concern which is very widely shared everywhere. And then you have floods, you have droughts, which have become so frequent and so intense that everybody is feeling it now across the world. So there's a lot more awareness today. And in that environment, we as a practice have tried to link water with more evidence with the climate negotiations and the climate process. Because we felt that it wasn't obvious to climate community to really understand that climate crisis is essentially a water crisis. And climate essentially is a threat multiplier as far as the water crisis is concerned. So we have made that case very strongly internally. And when the World Bank did what is called, if you want to Google, Country Climate and Development Report, CCDRs, which is perhaps the first time ever a much deeper understanding of how climate will impact countries' development goals, long-term development goals, and what will need to be done for country to focus on meeting the Paris commitments and countries' own development priorities in terms of adaptation, mitigation, building resilience. So far we've done about 30 plus reports which have been published. These are all in public domain, and we did an analysis of this. In all 30 reports, which is a report done at the country level, with the governments, with the academic community in the country, water has emerged as the most frequently referred topic in all country reports. So then it is easy for us to make a case to our regional vice presidents and country directors that the water needs to receive attention as far as the World Bank's climate action plan is concerned. And I think once we speak that language and provide the evidence, more people talk about it. I wanted to put that on the table because it is important that we all share this. It is not just because of World Bank. I think so many of you have been trying to link water better with climate change. So it has helped elevate the importance of water. But specifically on the question on our new president, so he's basically given us a new narrative, which I would say is easier to understand and far more convincing. So let me take just 2 minutes to explain so that you will understand how we are looking at it now going forward with our new president. So, World Bank has been in the news for the last few months because there is a feeling globally that the world is facing too many crises at the same time. And the multilateral system that was created after the Second World War, the UN and the multilateral banks, the system is not, system doesn't have the capacity to really respond to multiple crises the world is facing. So there is a need for rethinking how the multilateral system should be reformed, transformed, better organized. And the focus was on World Bank because we're dealing with global issues. So World Bank was asked to initiate this. And the first thing as part of this was that World Bank should, which is primarily focused on poverty alleviation as our vision, we were asked to revisit our vision, given the focus on climate change, pandemic, and these kind of issues the world is facing. So our president has given a formulation that was accepted by our governors. He says, a world free of poverty on a livable planet. That's our new vision. The second part of the vision, which is on a livable planet, the explanation that we have is that a planet is livable when people have access to clean water. By that definition, clean water, sanitation, etc. services. People have access to clean air, and people have access to clean and affordable energy. And when you have access to all these three, the world needs to be free of fragility, conflict, violence, and pandemic. So livable planet is a space in which water plays a very central role. So his articulation of the new vision and explanation on livable planet helps you now understand why water is very central for people, for planet, for nature, for biodiversity, for a good health, for food security, and so on and so forth. So this has definitely helped place water in our board discussions with our shareholders, with our governors. I was in Marrakesh during the annual meeting of the IMF and World Bank, and water was a very prominent issue that was discussed. There's one thing I want to mention is during this whole reform of the multilateral development banks, starting with the World Bank, what is called the evolution roadmap, there's another issue which is linked to water discussion, which I want to just mention this now. So in the evolution process, the shareholders and our partners around the world, they felt that the World Bank has a very strong country engagement model. So we go to a country, we work with the country, we identify the priorities, we work on those countries. But today the world is facing many challenges which are not unique to a country, which are being experienced by so many countries in the world at the same time. So a country engagement model is good, but it's not good enough. So we need both a country engagement model, but we also need a global engagement so that we can learn from each other and we can benefit from economies of scale and we can create a cross-regional mechanism, especially on those issues which are big challenges being faced by the world. So we went through a process to identify then which are those global challenges which, in addition to country-level programming and support, also need global engagement. And through a consultation exercise with our shareholders, internally with the staff, guess what? Water came at the top of one of the 8 global challenges that the World Bank will focus. And in the phase 1, 6 global challenges will be considered as priorities. And water security and climate adaptation is the first one. So you'll hear more of this now. Fast track water security and climate adaptation global challenge program, which is still being designed. It will not be a World Bank program, but World Bank wants to use the global challenge program as a global platform to mobilize knowledge, research, capacity building, financing, co-financing for action at the country level, but also creating opportunities for learning from each other. For example, this one. So that's basically how an agenda which was not so visible has emerged to be perhaps one of the, as I said, 6 top issues that the World Bank is going to focus, but take a much more partnership-based approach to work with our UN colleagues, bilaterals, foundations, private sector, universities. So I really look forward to working with all of you on this.
Yeah, I know we're gonna explore that space, and I promise I'll get to WASH in a second. But I do want to ask you, because I agree with you. I think the World Bank has gone through a very interesting process to arrive at this. The COP isn't. We're failing at the global level, I think, in terms of how we're prioritizing water. Why do you think that's happening?
So I think the change is on its way because COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, at least summary had reference to water in the context of adaptation. But when we look at the COP28 in Dubai, and I must commend the UAE's leadership on the COP28 process, and within that space, there is special interest in water. I cannot officially announce in this meeting, but this COP28 is going to be very different from all the other COPs you have seen on water agenda. There are several very high-level summits taking place, which will be a huge departure from the past. And I think it has a lot to do with our collective advocacy, communication, engagement, that no climate action is complete without really understanding how climate is impacting the hydrological cycle, what it means for managing water resources better, and what kind of information system, what kind of early warning, what kind of water storage systems you need, and so on and so forth. So I think the climate community is also able to see the connection much better because of our research, analysis, advocacy, and which is then helping to put water much more explicitly in the climate discussion, which so far, in my view, unfortunately, has been dominated by a discussion on mitigation, which is just as important as it is. The issue that the poor countries face, poor people face, is the issue of floods and drought, and that needs the adaptation focus, and that's why water is very central, and I would say water and food is very central in that space. So I'm very happy that if we have this discussion in 1 month from now, you'll see in the program, because I'm not supposed to disclose this at this time because we are not the organizers.
It's okay, nobody's listening.
But I can assure you that that's why I said I really commend the UAE for what they're doing on the water agenda. So you'll see in 1 month from now, this copy is going to be quite different.
Oh, that's great to hear. Okay, and you said this before, water security is the world's greatest challenge. Where does WASH fit into the World Bank's programming? How does WASH fit as a priority within the water programming?
So WASH is, of course, the almost 60% of our portfolio is water supply, sanitation, and hygiene, because that's the most basic need that the governments are working very hard to meet. Of course, many countries are not on track on water SDGs, but that remains the most important priority for the countries. Now, we are a client-driven organization. We will not impose our priorities on the countries. Governments will decide, countries will decide where they want to prioritize. Is it WASH? Is it irrigation? Is it water storage? Is it something else? So they prioritize. And then we have a discussion to design a program. So I think WASH remains predominantly the most important component of water security that the World Bank is currently focused. Now, the design of WASH programs need to be informed by climate impact on the water resources, on management of groundwater, management of surface water, because WASH needs a reliable, sustainable source of water. What you do not want is that you invest in WASH projects and the source runs dry in few years. So a very good understanding of water resource management is important, which I see as a bit of weakness in our project designs as well. So I've asked all my colleagues, in any WASH project, we would like to see a WRM component first, water storage, water management, you need to be absolutely sure where the water will come from. And that is currently being done. The second component is between water supply and sanitation and hygiene. I find most governments tend to prioritize, even within that space, to prioritize more water than sanitation. And I've advised my colleagues, that's exactly the wrong way of doing stuff, because if you do only water supply without sanitation, then you are forcing people to drink contaminated water. It's only a matter of time. So there should be no water supply without sanitation. Now, and this is what we will need to, first of all, make sure that even the WASH community understands this very well. And then you are able to make that case to the governments, because when you combine water supply and sanitation, it increases the cost, the investment that you need to reach the same people, same number of people. So, but this should not be seen as a trade-off between doing more water supply or to split between doing both water supply and sanitation as part of an investment. And we would certainly like, on our side, that there shall be no WASH project in the bank which does only water supply and no sanitation, or sanitation and no water supply, because that's basically absolutely the wrong practice. And I don't think that is the case now, but these changes we are trying to bring in our engagements, but we will also hope that the governments who are kind of in the driving seat in the design of programs, they work in a united manner on this. In many countries, I do understand that the water resource management, water supply and sanitation are managed in different ministries even. Even the sanitation is split between rural and urban ministries. So it makes it very complicated, and therefore I think rethinking the institutional structures I was recently in a country I will not name. I was talking to the Prime Minister and I said the same thing. And my advice to him was that what you need is a national water security platform, right, which brings all the ministers together and you focus on water and get the Minister of Finance, Minister of Economy, Planning into the room, and Minister of Defense in the room, because many countries, water security is a national security issue. So I think we need to change our language, our narrative, our understanding, and not be part of this continued silos within the water space.
Yeah, I'd also argue that I think and maybe if Barbara's here, she'd argue with me on this, that the climate impacts on sanitation are even more profound than they are in drinking water. Mm-hmm. Because I do worry about the resiliency of our sanitation management chain to extreme hydrologic events and the management of stormwater and what that means to peri-urban communities and informal settlements in places where we haven't managed sanitation properly. I do think that they're going to struggle more with that climate linkage, but.
Yeah, and I think the sanitation needs, sanitation has a branding problem. And I'll tell you why. My colleagues know this, that I go completely off script often, and I tell you what I think is. So I was, for example, I'll give you a parallel here. The desalination. Some people in the water family, they're crazy after desalination. Some people call it manufactured water in Australia. Some part of the world, they call it unconventional water. And none of these words the politicians understand. And people don't want to understand. Unconventional water, manufactured water. People will not drink this kind of stuff. So I was in a meeting recently, last week, 2 weeks back in Seville, on a huge event on desal and water reuse. And I told them, it was a big meeting, and all the industry leaders, all the big companies, from around the world, 500 water business leaders. I said, I'm not a water specialist, but guys, don't talk about this because none of the ministers will understand this. Any household will not want to drink this water. So I have proposed a name, you call it new water. Because when you recycle your wastewater after treatment and reuse it, it's a new water. Desal is a new water. And we'll see whether they accept it because they have to go through all their consumer behavior studies and all. All that I'm trying to say is that sanitation has a branding problem. Because when you say sanitation, the ministers don't feel very excited. The prime ministers don't feel very excited. So I think you got to really way of presenting it in a way that sanitation looks very attractive. It looks as if something very important for the economy, for the society, for people. So I'm just leaving that thought. We will also think, my colleague Claire is here, will think. But I do think that the water community has a communication problem. We are very engineering people. We think like engineers. Engineers, unfortunately, they are the last people to sit in the cabinet meetings, engineering ministries. This is not important for the prime minister. So I think we've got to think differently a bit. And that's why I've been thinking that the water security as a narrative appeals much better. I will not name a country. But yesterday I was called into some discussion, very high level discussion, 15 minutes notice, because the head of that state, of a very powerful state in the world, told somebody very powerful in my institution that they need my institution's help to deal with water security, because that's an existential issue for that country. So we would need to think a bit. And it's my homework also for us. How do we really elevate the profile of sanitation in the context of water security and climate adaptation? Because sanitation is an afterthought for people who work on water supply. So how do you turn it around and make a stronger case? It definitely needs work.
Are you sure that's not tied to a cost recovery challenge? I mean, I get we need to make sanitation sexy and we need to find ways to market it to policymakers. But I do worry about the economic arguments and the distribution of costs and benefits and how that works within sanitation, which is different than drinking water.
Well, cost recovery is an issue for pretty much the entire water sector. But I don't think that should be the reason why, or that is the reason, let's say, why sanitation is not really seen as important as drinking water. Now, there are countries today in the world where the head of state or the head of the government are making sanitation as a priority. Things move. And we know countries in Africa.
Right.
They have made sanitation as a priority. It's a political priority. You know, my case of my country is very obvious. So sometimes it's not the economics, it's the politics and the leadership is just so important. So how do we get more leadership on sanitation? How do we get more leadership on what sanitation means for women, for girls, for education, for health, for women's economic empowerment? Why should sanitation not be an issue, let's say, in countries where we have women leaders as prime ministers and ministers? I think somehow we are missing the point in making exactly the communication that needs to be done. And how do we bring more examples from Africa, from Asia, of when sanitation is made as a political priority, do governments win elections? Do people vote for the party which makes sanitation as a priority? I think we have more examples. And this is the part I think in the water practice I feel internally, we are so engineering community that we tend to think everything can be solved by looking at this as an engineering problem. Sanitation is not an engineering problem. Sanitation is, at this stage, is essentially, it's a political issue, it's a social issue, that acceptability, the desirability, that how can you afford a situation where every fourth person in the Pacific Islands openly defecates. Every third person in at least 23 countries in Africa openly defecates. So there has to be a much more serious political consideration to this. Now, when it comes to cost recovery, there are different parts of the water cycle where, the whole water cycle, I mean the sense of water supply, sanitation, irrigation, etc., where it is possible to apply, I would say, cost recovery considerations, and of course bring private sector in operation and management, sometimes PPP as well in running those facilities. But if that is that really holding back the sectors from investing in sanitation? I haven't found this to be a major constraint. The case we have is that if the Ministry of Finance tells the Minister of Water and Sanitation that you can borrow up to $200 million from African Development Bank, then if the minister says, I want to focus on reaching as many people as possible with water supply and not do sanitation, and if my colleagues in African Development Bank colleagues don't push back and say, well, no, the minimum standard for doing this is a toilet and this and that, etc. That's how it will be done. Then we have a problem. And I think, in my view, my own colleagues are not making that strong case, right? That no water supply without sanitation. So I think those things need to change. And the amount of financing that is needed to also include sanitation in the programs, and how much of debt this becomes for a country when they are borrowing or other resources. It's an issue, but it's not a major issue at this point in time. But the countries where you have a well-functioning institution, well-functioning utility, etc., they are able to. I was in Senegal recently, and I was very happy the way they are sector is organized, the way their water people and the sanitation people work, yes, I mean, one is working better than the other, but then the sanitation thing started a bit late. So they will come along. But we got to really bring more examples of how countries are dealing with sanitation issues much more as a policy issue, and then hopefully other countries will also pick up. In my own institution, I was talking to our director for Pacific, and I said, look what, I said, 1/4 of people living in Pacific Islands openly defecate. And I said, let's not talk about digital leapfrog and connectivity, etc. We got to fix this. Let's make sure that women are not forced to go places where they're so vulnerable and so on and so forth. They need reliable sanitation, affordable sanitation. This is basic developments. I think sometimes I find the basics is not so basic to us. We get carried away by artificial intelligence, which is important. But we need to bring artificial intelligence in solving the sanitation problem. Let's get everybody reliable, affordable sanitation should be really a political priority.
Well, I think we bear some of the blame for that, and I hope you can carry this message forward. When we talk about water security, for some of us, sanitation's embedded in that, because we know the pollution of water is what prevents us from being able to have access to all the resources that we want. But maybe we need to be more explicit again, and we need to talk about water security and sanitation. We have a UN water conference, maybe it's a UN water and sanitation conference. Maybe we need to be more explicit and make sure it's getting at least the political recognition that we need. But I hear you, and it sounds like you'll be a champion for some of that going forward. Let's move down a level. Let's say we've got political commitment, political prioritization by governments, and it comes down to implementation. What do you see as some of the main challenges in implementing WASH programs in country on the ground?
I mean, I think the capacity constraints in most governments which are implementing sanitation and water supply projects is a big concern. And they are not able to hire good engineers, good sanitation engineers in most countries. And I find this, when I travel in Africa, I find this is a huge problem. Many people don't study, they want to study sanitation and water supply in the universities. So I think we have to do something about it, raise the profile. That is great to be a water engineer, it's great to be a sanitation engineer.
We would welcome grants to help build and strengthen institutions overseas that can do that. We're all with you.
And this is something which we would like to encourage all of you here. Different capacities, just make sure that it is a priority. It's not obvious to people. Because if there is money in the government and they can't hire good engineers, they can't hire good sanitation engineers, we can have good discussion, but nothing will get done. So we need good people in the public sector, which is the government, the utilities, the operators, really to be able to do their job. And there are some brilliant people, Again, I was in Dakar recently and I met these people from SONES, some really bright people in their national utility. And I see colleagues from Ethiopia here from the government Ministry of Water Supply and Sanitation. So we do have great people. We need many more people to join government to work on these sectors. We would like to see how we can help universities to attract more people. And universities where they do not have water academies, please get in touch with the World Bank country directors there and see how we can include that component in the programs of the World Bank financing. Because I know in many countries where we are financing countries in our projects, and that money goes to universities to set up water academies for water supply, for sanitation, for water resource modeling, river basin modeling, long-term weather forecasting, and we are strengthening a number of national institutions of hydrology around the world. Yesterday, we got a request from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. They want to set up a desalination water academy. They want to offer that facility to people from around the world to learn, which is great. So this is an area where we really need to invest. You know, I used to work in the government for many years, and sometimes I used to find that, I had just two people, and I was responsible, called Director Disaster Management, Government of India. And I had two people working with me. And I used to receive 20 requests from a meeting from UNDP first, then UNICEF, then WHO, then Asian Development Bank, and then it's a whole day from 9 to 7 you're meeting people, and then you have to do your work after everybody is gone. So capacity is an issue because you just don't have the people. So I think there is a need for much more thinking, particularly in countries which are lagging on water SDGs. The second is that how do we bring private sector into this space, who can bring some expertise, bring some innovation, help improve the quality of service and efficiency. And I remember when I was in Ethiopia and I went to see the State Minister for Finance, I was talking about this, how do we bring private sector into the providing services? Same in Ghana and Senegal, and there are some very good examples. So then if you kind of think more of a public-private partnership, you are able to create an ecosystem in which a lot of your capacity questions are addressed by bringing the African private companies, domestic private sector into this. And then you are building a very different ecosystem then. So that's basically the part of the strategy. I'm not saying the private sector needs to invest or you need to privatize anything. I'm saying you create that space for private companies to provide the services, operate and manage the facilities based on certain medium-term contracts, and it is working quite well in many parts of the world. The third is role of community organizations. This is not government's business alone. I think we really need to find a way of engaging community-based organizations in delivering these services. And different countries have different community institutions, tribal councils, citizen councils, village development councils, women's organizations, young people's organization. Let's get them into the water sector. Let's mobilize them and create very active young people's water bodies, water forums, so that they really get involved in designing, supervision, oversight of the programs. And again, this is something which water ministries have to take a slightly different role of social mobilization, work with the ministries of social and youth empowerment, etc., because that can really help some of these last mile challenges. Today in many countries, you invest millions of dollars, create a lot of infrastructure, and then you realize there's no last mile connection or there's no first mile connection. The person who's really supposed to benefit from that infrastructure is not benefiting because somebody forgot that you need to connect that to a household in terms of water supply or to the sewerage connection and so on and so forth. So I think that focus will come when you involve young people, women's group in the whole program itself, so that there's more engagement in doing. These days, I find in many countries where the whole governments are saying to the farmers, organize yourself, we'll give you X cubic meter of water every 7th day at this point. And you take this water from here and you irrigate the way you want to irrigate. So people, communities, they get together, they build their own laws reservoir. And from there, the community engages an operator whose job is to build that reservoir and do the channels to everybody's farm. And this operator gets money from the community. And these community-based, kind of community-managed structures and community engaging private sector through a contract in irrigation sector is also becoming very popular now. So what I'm trying to say is that our model of capacity deficit and how do we address this in the water sector, we could learn a lot from many other sectors. And this will require a more multi-stakeholder approach at different tiers of the government in a country.
So how does the bank then, if the priorities are set by the governments and they set up these processes, but you have a very strong interest in advancing the SDGs, how does the bank ensure that programming is reaching the populations that we need to reach to meet the SDGs and the most marginalized in some of these places?
So Let's start with the basics first, the way I look at it. First, people who are not poor, they already have access to water and sanitation. Because there is a market out there which helps you to access water. So essentially, it is those who are poor, marginalized, remote communities, extremely poor populations are the ones who are basically your target in terms of water supply and sanitation. And I think that is definitely the case. And I'm talking about households. But then you have also the institutional side of it, the schools, hospitals, healthcare facilities, which are often ignored. And I think they should be the priorities because children learn a lot of stuff from schools. So having water supply, sanitation, hygiene in school has a direct impact on the household where they will tell their parents, oh, we have a toilet in school, we should have a toilet at home. Let's get one at any cost. This is as important as having toys. So I think we need to look at some of these issues as well. But I think in the context of targeting poor, indigenous people, one, the focus on fragile areas, because more than half of the world's extremely poor people today live in fragile areas. And according to OECD and other estimates, our own estimates, more than 60% of the world's poor will be in fragile areas by 2030. So which means that your challenge in kind of reaching the poor is primarily going to be a challenge in delivering water services, in water and sanitation services in fragile areas. But fragile areas have many complexities, as you mentioned in your opening. You have a government which is not legitimate, let's say, in many cases, or you don't have a government. So how do you work in an environment, particularly for us, an institution that was mandated to work with governments? So what do you do in these cases? Of course, our engagement in these situations have evolved over time. We have found new ways of working with new partners in these cases, and it has allowed us to stay engaged with the communities and provide water, health, education services to people. So this is why under the Global Challenge program on fast-track water security and climate adaptation that I was mentioning before, we are looking at delivering water services in fragile areas as a special component of the program, so that we are very consistently exploring always that nobody is left behind in fragile areas where most poor live, and likelihood of people being left behind on water SDGs 6.1, 6.2 is the highest. It's going to be challenging, but for example, in Afghanistan, we are working with Aga Khan Foundation and UNOPS. In Yemen, we are working with UNICEF, WHO, UNDP. In Somalia, we are working with ICRC. In Lebanon, where I was there before as the Middle East Director, we used to work with IFRC, FAO, UNICEF. In Iraq, so in WHO, we did Iran COVID-19 response. So I think we have found a way of working with people who have the footprint. I was in Afghanistan a month back. And so we are kind of stretching our space, trying to reach the poor through our partners, but we don't have all the answers. It's a difficult space. The world is currently experiencing there's a lot of turmoil in the world. When peace is at stake, there's a saying, somebody used to say many years back, there's no development without peace, and there's no peace without development. So when the peace is threatened, development takes a very strong beating. So people like us, and I guess all of you in the room, we'll really have to think in this new environment today, how do we continue delivering water services to people who need the most? What kind of business models will work? and who are the partners on the ground who are risking their lives to deliver these services. And so I travel a lot and I go to difficult countries precisely for this reason, because I want my teams in those countries to know they are not the only ones. People sitting in Washington need to be out there in the front line.
That raises an interesting question. How do you work personally, giving your own history, your own experience, to build cultural humility within the practice? When I represented the U.S. government and now you represent the World Bank, when you walk into a room, you're immediately the power dynamics. You're the most powerful partner in the room. And we have to be very sensitive to that when we're working with these communities, something we talked quite a bit about yesterday, especially when we're trying to get locally developed solutions. How do you build this cultural humility among staff who are engaging on behalf of the bank in these very sensitive settings?
So, like any organization, we invest a lot in our staff, in their soft skills, in their leadership skills, in their interpersonal skills, which is a big part of our focus. But there are situations where we learn from each other. We learn from each other all the time, and we all, as human beings, those who are very passionate about development, and a necessary condition for being passionate is being humble. I have never seen somebody being passionate about something and not being humble. So that basically takes you to a situation where, I will tell you a situation. I was sitting in Kabul in a meeting. There were 30 NGOs working with people in different parts of Afghanistan. This is just before the earthquake when I was in Kabul. And we were talking to NGOs who work in these areas where there's no water, it's difficult to live. They have to walk long distance to bring water. And these NGOs are working for the people there. And just listening to them, their experiences. And so I went and hugged this person. I said, I wish I told him that you are doing actually God's job, I wish I had your job. And this was not, it was very natural on my part to go and give him this compliment and appreciate what this person was doing. This is just a realization that you may be working for any institution, World Bank, US government, UN, any government. End of the day, what matters is who you are, your character. And your character is defined by how you react with your emotions, your feelings to different situations. So that person doing that work for 16 households in Herat, people living in very difficult mountainous region, trying to get them clean water every day, work with them on storing water for 16 households. And that's a great service. And that man is very happy. He's very happy. So sometimes I think these feelings are extremely important. And I think we inspire each other, we see each other. The human being by nature are very emotionally very intelligent, and I think we are no exception. And the World Bank itself, as you work in difficult situations, you learn from other people, you learn from your own experiences, you learn from your own mistakes as well.
Again, we've got mics on both sides, so we may have time for a couple of questions. I want to shift a little bit to something that you've been promoting, is that you mentioned the practice's role in building knowledge within the bank, but you've also articulated a pretty broad agenda in strengthening knowledge globally and positioning the bank as a knowledge manager, a data manager, information manager globally. What does that look like? And what is it you hope to be able to accomplish through that? And what role do you think the academic scientific community might be able to play in contributing to that?
Well, first of all, I think we have to learn a lot from what the academic community is doing in the US, around the world, because some of the cutting edge research is happening there, which are, and especially the interdisciplinary research. And Water is a very interdisciplinary research. And I think this is something which we need to connect better with the academic communities around the world. And that's one of the reasons why I'm here today. My colleagues are here in this conference. But on the World Bank side itself, just to give you a sense, we spend about close to $2.5 billion every year. $2.5 billion every year on creating knowledge. This is country-level research, regional research, global research, documents, papers, policy documents, world development reports, flagship reports, etc. It's a lot. And in the water global practice alone, on an average, there will be 50 reports done. And these are very rigorous reviews internally, often involving external reviews. So we make a tremendous contribution to the global knowledge on any particular subject. And our knowledge is informed more by the problems that we see in the countries, or the problems we see as cross-regional global problems, and how does one try to respond. But most of our research is targeted towards policy actions, country-level policy actions or global response to a problem. And I think it has its own space in terms of how we use that then for our dialogue with the governments. For example, you just talked about sanitation. There's a big piece of work we have just initiated now, a big global report to come next year on sanitation in times of climate change. And the idea is to position sanitation as for the reasons Aaron you mentioned, but more importantly also how can climate financing be made available to governments who prioritize to work on safe, resilient, etc. sanitation services. So that's a big report coming out next year. We just started to work on water, fragility, and peace. More importantly, water for building peace, as a big report to come out in 26. The other report that will come out in 26 is Water for Livable Planet, which is to connect water with nature, water with biodiversity, water for wildlife. So I think that's the space also we're currently working. A lot of this involves working with universities in US, in Europe, and think tanks in the developing countries in the global south as well. So we're doing a lot of work on this, and within the global practice, in addition to, as I said, knowledge to implementation is this space of creating new knowledge, addressing the knowledge gap and making that available for country engagement, policy dialogue, sectoral reforms, and designing projects, and then bring that knowledge back into this. There's one important issue that we have noticed is that, so we have positioned the World Bank quite well as a knowledge bank, and as one of our managing director often likes to say, World Bank without knowledge is bankrupt. And therefore, knowledge is a very big part of our focus in terms of how we carry out this work. In my own experience, in 15 years in the field, dealing with the governments at very senior levels, I've often heard this from the ministers and prime ministers. They value our knowledge much more than our financing, especially on some of the key policy issues, including in the water sector. So I hope that will be elevated to a different level under the new president, a new vision, a new institution where the world is facing too many interconnected challenges. An area where there is a lot of work currently happening now is how to position the World Bank also as a world's data bank. And that is the area where the work is evolving, because we don't really have a system of of positioning, of making our data that we have available to people for research and for programs, monitoring, evaluation, and so on and so forth. So we have a chief statistician.
Now you got me doing it. Statistician. Never
So
mind.
difficult. I need coffee.
Statistician.
So I think, so there's some
A little
thinking
help,
going
a little
on.
help here?
There's some,
Thank you.
there's some thinking going on because we have a data hub, and how do you basically make it as part of a bigger data bank? But this is an area where I think with artificial intelligence becoming so big in our day-to-day life now, I really don't know what this will look like in a few months' time. These days, I have activated generative AI on all my machines, I mean, laptop, desktop, everywhere.
Right.
And I find the generative AI is the research, that search engine is so powerful. And we've started using AI in our system in the bank for creating summaries of our reports, writing briefs, writing documents. So I really don't know where it is going. But
Well, I think we would certainly welcome greater access to the data that the bank collects in its projects and programs that could then be analyzed and used to develop learnings. I think, no question. I think there's so much data being generated, how you curate that in a thoughtful way and making it accessible to people becomes a challenge. And I also worry about data is not neutral.
Yeah.
And you and I talk about this in transboundary water context where, data might change the balance of discussions or power in certain relationships, and that too are very difficult things to think about. Sorry, I know we have a question over here on the left, at least one. Please go ahead.
there are also ladies
Oh.
standing there.
Hi, my name's Temi Ibatoye, and I'm a PhD candidate at North Carolina State studying environmental engineering. And I appreciated your comments on science communication and branding. And I was wondering if you have any more specific suggestions on how we as a sector can move towards more clear, intentional communication of our work.
I mean, one area I would say that if the health community, the public health community, if they own sanitation more than they do now, it will have a lot more. Because after COVID-19, I have found that the health ministers have become very important for the prime ministers and for the cabinet. So if the health ministers could make the case for sanitation, I think it will help. Internally, I have found, like for example, my equivalent, global director responsible for health practice, and so we are trying to work with him a lot more because they have access to people that we don't have. So that's one way of looking at it. The other is to connect sanitation with the climate change better. But I don't really have an answer to your question on branding because I didn't study communication. Maybe I think you all should do some kind of crowdsourcing of ideas to see, is there a way of packaging sanitation differently? But trust me, communication is very powerful. If you want to communicate, you see, what's the difference between a leader and somebody who's not a leader? Communication is a very important skill. Leadership is about communicating in a way that you connect with people and on the issues that you want to talk. So I think this is work in progress. I will also think, and if you also think, you have my numbers, you can Google my contact address, please write to us. If you have a new name, let us know and let us work together, come up with a new name. Sanitation does need a very exciting name. That's what I think.
Yeah, and I do think the health behavior and the hygiene community do a much better job engaging communication experts and social science. I don't think we in the engineering side do as good of a job doing that, and that's something that I certainly take home with you. Please.
Hi, Kelly Baker from the University of Iowa. First, thank you for your comments. This is really insightful. I want to pick up on the thread of climate and multi-policy sector collaboration. There's a third kind of silent partner that links water, sanitation, and health, and that is housing and urban planning, right? I mean, you can build the best water and sanitation systems, but at some point, they can be overwhelmed by stormwater if it's not managed appropriately. At least so like one of my partners in Kenya, State Department of Urban Housing and Development, is leading the climate resiliency policy plan for Kenya. And at this moment, there are other sectors involved, but the sort of financing linking those is still a little nebulous. I'm wondering if you could highlight some examples from the World Bank where they have kind of bridged some of these urban planning and sanitation, urban planning and water sectors to develop programs that help them work better together.
Well, I think Metro Manila is a good example. Metro Manila, which used to experience major floods pretty much every year, how they've been able to really look at the whole urban planning, drainage system, flood forecasting, and connecting different layers of the system, governance system, from the smallest unit of the municipality to the Metro Manila level. So I think Chennai is another good example of how they have been able to link the urban planning with basic services to the people and that not just for water but also sanitation and other services to people. The question is, how do you get these people to think together? And our approach to this is much more integrated than in silos. And this is the reason why the more interagency, interministerial collaboration happens in planning water supply and sanitation services, the better. And you cannot imagine. Now the water utilities, let's say, in most urban areas will be essentially, even if it is a national utility, the unit working in the municipality will be integrated to the municipal office, which is where it sits. Or in other cases, the water utility is just a department in the municipal office, because it is the municipality which is responsible for providing the services. So I would assume a certain level of collaboration, integration will happen. When I was in the government and I was running large municipalities in the government, the water supply sanitation was a big department within the overall municipal commissioner's office. And you will take very much this into consideration in how you design, how you focus on providing services and building resilience for extreme events as part of the overall urban planning. The town and the legal framework in countries which really looks at the urban planning, it needs to provide for water supply and sanitation services very much as part of the legal framework. And many countries, that is not the case, even now. So water community would need to work with the urban planning framework in a country to make sure that the water services are included there. Many countries have water codes, and water code or water laws. And I looked at some of the water codes only recently. I will not name the countries. And you find that the code has a very strong rural bias. It completely overlooks the urban space. And when I asked this question, I was told that the urban space legislation is to be done through a different ministry, through a different agency, and that's what it should be. But the question is, does that really take into consideration provision of basic services and building resilience to extreme events in that area? The answer is, it is still a work in progress. So you are quite spot on in the whole issue of this COP, by the way, for example. This COP has a very strong focus on urban water resilience. And that is essentially to bridge this gap between the urban planning community and the water community. So I think this kind of conversation will really help bring these people together.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm getting the hook, so I encourage you guys to come up and talk to Suresh afterwards. Maybe two quick things as we close. One, leaving internal bureaucratic battles aside, what keeps you up at night? What are the things that you're looking out over the horizon that you're most worried about when it comes to the sector? And then two, what gives you some optimism? What makes you think we're moving in the right direction?
No, I think I sleep quite well, so it's not that.
I don't think we do.
No, seriously, I think, no, I feel every day when I go home, wherever I am, or go to my hotel, I feel good because I see many governments, many private companies, many universities, many young people interested in the water security agenda. And within that, I see my institution playing a small role, but playing an important role. So that makes me feel good because that's the way we have to go. I personally also feel good because when I travel, I meet a lot of people. Like I was in Accra, I saw many people from Ghana here. And I went to a number of schools 40, 50 miles away from Accra. And I talked to a lot of girls because they have a new toilet in the school, new sanitation facility in the school. And they were very happy. So I was asking them, what did you do when you did not have this in the school? And they're very shy, they didn't want to tell me, but then the teachers explained to me that during their periods, they will not come to the school because there's no privacy in the school, there's no way they could change. So they'll just stay home. Or if they have to go for, if there's no toilet in the school, if one person has to go, they would need 3 more girls to come with them so that the other 3 will keep an eye. So now they have a toilet in the school, they're very happy. The basic things in life, but I really found they were very happy that they have something. So these moments give me hope, because the more we do this together, go to scale, do it quickly, and we're not asking for big things, we're asking for basic things in life. So how can we go faster? How can we go bigger on scale? And this is what our new president is bringing. Scalable, replicable, aggregable, moving quickly, a sense of urgency to deliver this. So that's why I'm very happy about it. It keeps me going. But we have to really come together on this.
Sarosh Kumarjar, thank you.
Thank you very much.
So, we made it. Some of you. A few announcements before you go. Don't forget your luggage. If you forget it, we'll give it to the undergrads or the postdocs, and they will sell it on eBay and pay for tuition. So don't forget your luggage. Also, there were a couple of tweets, and so we encourage you to go back over the week, and there's a most tweeted and most liked tweets, and so thank you for communicating about the conference over social media. I definitely want you to turn around and look in the booth behind you and give Bart a wave and thank him for the incredible job, as well as Paul, wherever Paul is. And we thank all of our Friday Center staff for the amazing catering, for the amazing service that they've provided, and safety and security that they've enabled this week. And so if you see them on your way out, please thank them for the amazing job that they did here for you this week. And I know you don't see them, but Island Innovation, they're the ones responsible. So Christian, if you can hear me, Christian and James and Abia, thank you so much for lifting the online program for us all the way throughout the week. So anything that was live streamed and recorded is responsible. The Island Innovation was responsible for that. And you will see that next week, all posted on the YouTube channel. So thank you to Island Innovation for that. We couldn't host this conference without the Water Institute staff. You will have probably communicated with Anushka or Manal or Rima. And so can you all thank Anushka and Manal and Rima for their incredible job? And our volunteers who made it possible, and our Water Institute researchers, thank you so much for your contribution to the conference and its success. Oh, and now we have a quick little presentation for you. Next year's conference, by the way, starts on October the 14th, so keep that on your agenda.
So apply for your visas now.
Right? I also wanted to point you one last time to the hard copy program. We have a list of all the people who made the conference possible this year, so please don't forget about making sure to thank everybody on your way out. But this conference is what it is because of you, and all of you who come from far and wide to join us for a week of learning. We are so grateful to have you here in person. For all of those who couldn't make it this year, we hope to see you next year. And look forward to seeing your smiling faces and all the lessons that you've learned and all the data that you'll bring to the conference next year. I especially want to thank our government folks, especially from Uganda and Ghana and Ethiopia, for coming all this way and being with us this week and letting us learn from you as well. Thank you for your contribution, and I'll turn it over to Aaron to thank our sponsors.
Just thank our core sponsors for sure. And again, you've seen these week after every day this week, but a special call out thank you to the Conrad N. Hilton Foundation, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Osprey Foundation, and World Vision are key sponsors. But each and every one of the sponsors up there, you make this possible. And even those who are online, who have voluntarily paid a fee to participate in the conference online, we very much appreciate that and all the contributions that we've gotten from each and every one of you.
And with that, I will make the final announcement about the field trip. Anybody going on the field trip this afternoon? Great. We had to take out the wastewater treatment visit, but we will be meeting at 12:50 at the front doors. And so if you're going and you've signed up for that, please meet at the front doors at 12:50, and we'll take you to the water treatment facility for a tour there. And other than that, it's lunchtime, and so...
Sorry, one more thank you. Sorry. We said this Wednesday, but Kata really is the inspiration behind the conference and makes this work. And so, Kata, thank you for everything you've done.
You're very welcome.
Lunch.
Enjoy your lunch, and please travel home safely. That's it.